Bienvenidos de nuevo a CriptoConvi, podcast que todo entusiasta y escéptico de las criptomonedas necesita escuchar. Yo soy Chica Web3, creadora de contenido Web3 y fiel creyente en el potencial de las criptomonedas. En este episodio 18 hablaremos de cripto con un veterano de Wall Street. Como saben, en esta segunda temporada decidí traer a personas para crear una dinámica un poco menos tipo monólogo y hoy lo voy a hacer con un invitado de honor. Y si me preguntan a mí, es el más especial, pero obvio que estoy sesgada porque estoy aquí con mi chico Web3, veterano de Wall Street. Muchos ya saben que ha estado compartiendo newsletters conmigo. Si todavía no han revisado nuestro newsletter, les recomiendo que vayan a Instagram y le den clic al linktree que está allí y busquen nuestro newsletter. Chico Web3 ha estado publicando los últimos de por allá y la verdad es que trae muchísimo valor. Este episodio obviamente tiene la particularidad de que es en inglés porque lamentablemente el español de Chico Web3 todavía no está en nivel técnico. Y bueno, si no te sientes cómodo con el inglés, este episodio va a estar también en YouTube para que puedas escucharlo con subtítulos. Por los momentos nos queda darnos, así que comencemos con este episodio. Voy a cambiar ahorita al inglés. Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm actually super happy to be here with you. I think it's long due. This is the second time we're recording this episode.
It is.
We did it back in November, and then our lives changed a lot. Like, can you tell us a little bit, like, what happened in this past 4 months? Who are you, and what are we going to talk about today?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very excited to introduce myself to your listeners. I am Chico Web3, and as you mentioned in your introduction, I come from a Wall Street background. I worked at a wealth management firm for 18 years, managed multi-asset class investment portfolios for high net worth individuals and families, and also for institutional investors such as pension funds, public and private corporations, university endowments, insurance funds. As you mentioned, there have been a lot of changes over the last 4 months since we first recorded our podcast. I've left my job at my firm, and so have you at your Web2 job, and we're both jumping in full-time to Web3 consulting work, content creation and education and things like that. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit.
I think we should do that by the end of the episode. But yeah, so like a quick question. Maybe, you have been in Wall Street for, what is it, 18 years now? Where in Wall Street? Do you want to give that information to the followers?
Yeah, sure. So I actually worked for Morgan Stanley for 18 years in their wealth management division. So obviously Morgan Stanley has a lot of divisions. It's a big company, but I worked specifically in wealth management and asset management for our clients.
Gotcha. And what got you into crypto from the beginning? And what initially caught your attention in the crypto space?
So I've been aware of crypto for quite a long time. So I've been aware of crypto really since it was, or for Bitcoin rather, since it was first invented after the global financial crisis. So
you heard about it in 2009?
I heard about it. Yeah. I didn't know anything about it. And frankly, it was a little bit too technical at that time for me to even know how to get involved with it. I wasn't really interested in getting involved with it at that point. It was still so new. But I always kind of understood it at a fundamental level because I started my career right before the global financial crisis. And one of the things that always struck me, which never really sat well with me, was the fact that all these banks that had taken on too much risk were getting bailed out essentially by taxpayer money and by printing new money, which obviously diluted the currency, the US dollar, for people, which is actually another form of taxation, inflation. So that's always been kind of like the premise of introducing something like Bitcoin. And from a fundamental standpoint, I always kind of agreed with it. I just never really knew enough about Bitcoin, how to access it, at that point until really until recently. I bought my first Satoshis in Sats. I bought my first Sats, I want to say probably in 2018 or 2019. Since then, I've been, I started educating myself on a personal level and then really started to get into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency more broadly during COVID. We were all locked down. Again, the government started printing an immense amount of new currency. That's when I started to realize, like, hey, they're onto something. It's a great, diversifier for, at that point I had only traditional financial assets in my portfolio. So I saw it as both a great diversifier, a really great growth component of my portfolio, and more importantly, a hedge against currency inflation.
Gotcha. So I actually want to know your opinion. How long do you think it will take institutions to actually be in the game? Are we there? Like, what can you tell us regarding the adoption for retail versus institution?
Yeah, so about how Wall Street firms are adopting cryptocurrencies and or making them available to their clients. It's still not It's still not great, to be honest. So, for example, there's several Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs available. However, the access isn't quite there. So, I'll give you an example. At Morgan Stanley, I really wasn't allowed to buy any Bitcoin ETFs or Ethereum ETFs in any of our managed accounts or accounts that I had discretion over. And then, you know, to give you some detail on that. So managed accounts in the United States, at least across the big broker dealers, account for really like 70% of all wealth management assets in the United States. So we weren't able to buy any ETFs in any of those accounts. I could only buy them if a client specifically called me and asked me to buy a Bitcoin ETF in their brokerage account. So from that standpoint, it's still very not accessible to a lot of advisors and a lot of clients, because most clients, they don't want to be making their own investment decisions. That's why they hire advisors and portfolio managers. So if there's an investment opportunity, management clients expect their advisors to be educated and to, if it's a good investment, to buy it for them. And that just isn't possible at a lot of these firms at the moment. So it comes down to, I guess, also a lack of education for advisors and clients. Like I said, people don't really want to invest in things they don't understand, especially professional investors. And unless you're like us and in the trenches every day, there's no one out there like educating. Since the Bitcoin ETF became available over a year ago, I think at this point, there hasn't been a single person in my office since then trying to educate advisors on what actually Bitcoin is and what its role is in a portfolio. So advisors, they know what it is, but they aren't educated. And because they're not educated, they're not going to be buying it for their clients. So there's a lot of work to be done on the educational front. And then the last thing I'll talk about, which is another big obstacle, which might be obvious, is volatility. So the majority of our retail clients are older, retired boomers, for example, and boomers control more than 50% of the total wealth in the United States.
Wow.
So they've made their money. They're already rich. They're not trying to get rich. And quite frankly, they don't want the volatility of Bitcoin in their portfolios, especially when they don't really understand it. They want a portfolio that can earn 6 to 8% a year and provide income for their retirement. And they're not interested in owning something that could lose half of its value in a month, as we've seen a lot of these altcoins do over the last 30 days. So I suspect that when the younger generations do inherit, family money, there's going to be a massive demographic tailwind as a lot of the younger people in this country are more educated and can deal with that volatility. But, that's still a ways away, and we're not seeing that yet, at least. And then the second part of your question is about the institutional side.
Yeah. What is the institutional adoption? Like, do you actually think they're on board, or this is all like, part of the bull cycle that everyone wants to be a part of it, but it's not actually an adoption like as we think it is.
So I'll split that institutional side into two groups. One group is like the professional investors, like hedge funds, investment funds. Hedge funds have really started to adopt, at least started to buy cryptocurrency exposure. Some of that is long only directional exposure. Some of that is market neutral trading exposures and things like that. But on the hedge fund side and the professional investor side, institutional side, yes, there is some meaningful adoption going on. But then there's the other side, like pension funds, college endowments, or any like kind of board directed institution that hires advisors to manage their assets for them. There it gets a little bit more tricky because there's a lot of logistical and legal work that needs to be done before a fund or an institution like that can even own Bitcoin, even in an ETF form. Most of these entities are governed by what's called an investment policy statement, which is a legal document that really tells them what they can invest in. So making changes to these investment policy statements relies on a lot of education of the investment committees, and they can take years to make changes to allow for something like Bitcoin to be included in some of these portfolios. So I think it will come eventually, but it will just take some time. And like I said, the biggest hurdle right now is just education. People don't understand it, and people don't want to invest in something they don't understand.
Okay, Chico Web3. I want to know, what is your perspective on where are we in the cycle right now? Given your experience that you have analyzing financial cycles, you of course have been, giving a look to Bitcoin since its beginning. So where do you think we currently stand in the crypto market cycle?
Yeah, so I think we're still in a bull market. So when you think about assets and, kind of like the forward-looking performance of assets, there are a few main factors that can kind of predict or help to predict the future price action of any asset class, really. Growth, inflation, and monetary policy really are the big three.
Right.
So, you know, when we came into the year, it was looking like growth, or the rate of change of growth, was going to be accelerating through at least, maybe the first 9 months of the year, and at the same time, we had a Federal Reserve, and I'm talking about the US here, a Federal Reserve in the US that was getting incrementally more dovish, so combining those two things, the setup for crypto assets and really all risk assets coming into the year was pretty positive. So, but since then, since the new administration has come in, new President Trump, so their administration has really, I guess, thrown a wrench into the gears of the economy, which has caused a lot of serious uncertainty and volatility in all markets. Bitcoin's off about 20% or so from its peaks in January.
37%.
37% now?
Well, no, today was 85, fine, but it got to 79. So yeah. So it was a big volatility, yeah.
Wow. And then some of the altcoins are down 50% or more.
Right.
Right. So we recently published a newsletter on Substack. So I'll urge everyone listening to read and subscribe to our newsletter. And that goes into a lot more detail. But I guess at a high level, now given the change in the economic trajectory, just due to a lot of the changes from the new administration, I think we have a couple of months now of some choppy sideways to down trading action before really growth can resume in the economy. So I think that, starting maybe in June time frame, growth will start to reaccelerate, inflation will start to reaccelerate, the Fed will start lowering rates, liquidity in the economy will start to reaccelerate. All of these bullish kind of signals will converge, and we'll have we can resume the bull market. So I don't think the bull market's over. I think that we're just in a transition period, with the new administration really kind of disrupting the economy with a lot of the things they're doing at the moment.
I'm gonna put you on the spot here. If I am asking you to give you probabilities of, for example, the bull market gonna revamp, you think June, July, whatnot. What are the probabilities of that versus revamping by beginning of next year? Just like if you want to give like probabilities, if not, like we'll just go to the next question.
I don't know if I can give a probability. I mean, the data is changing. We came into the year and it was pretty clear that, the data, at least some of the economic data that was coming through in January, was leading to an acceleration of growth in the economy. But, things can change really quickly. So I don't know if I can give a probability. The economic data, the inflation data is all telling us that it's more likely than not that that growth is going to resume, probably in the May, June, July timeframe. But that can change. Obviously new data can come in. Trump can go crazy and announce 300% tariffs on every single one of our trading partners and completely destroy the economy. Who knows? I mean,
Yeah, of course,
anything can
it's
happen.
gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But I think it's more likely than not that it happens before last year that the bull market resumes.
All right. Satisfied with that answer. Thank you. Okay, let's just go to what is the one thing or maybe the top things that you are excited about this crypto environment, right? Like, are there any specific narratives, sectors that you're particularly bullish on that you would like to share with the audience? I know we are into different things, so of course I always share what I'm more interested in. But I really think the projects that you're looking into are very valuable, and I would like you to share it.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess first and foremost, Bitcoin is always going to be like the number one, my largest allocation in my portfolio. What I'm most long-term bullish on. I do think we're going to have an altcoin alt season. I know it's been delayed quite a bit. And a lot of these alts, except a few, haven't really been able to outperform Bitcoin. But I do think that we are going to get that rotation. Initially, there are some projects that I'm particularly focused on at the moment. So I'll talk about like one like deep value token that I've been allocating to recently is Thorchain. And the symbol for that token is Rune, RUNE. And the thesis here is actually quite simple. So what Thorchain is, it's a layer one blockchain and a decentralized exchange, a DEX. That's really the only solution, or at least the only one that I know of, that allows native asset swaps of tokens. So like, for example, you can swap Bitcoin to Ethereum or Avalanche. They're onboarding Solana at some point. I don't think it's happened yet. And so you can swap native tokens without using any bridges. So you don't have the risk of using bridges, which are susceptible to hacks. There's no wrapped tokens. It's just native swaps. So what's super unique about that is it allows Bitcoin holders to access DeFi applications with their native Bitcoin. So the Rune, which is the utility token, it accrues value directly from all activity that happens on Thorchain and the decentralized exchange. And the main catalyst here that I see is the launch of Rujira, which is a DeFi. It's the first DeFi protocol that's going to be built on top of Thorchain. So it's merging multiple DeFi protocols into a single application, and that should really drive increased on-chain activity, which will also accrue directly to the base token Rune. So the first Rujira apps are really set to be launched literally any day now. I saw something on X this morning about some more detail about Rujira. So that's imminent. So why is it such a deep value play right now? So there's a pretty significant crisis that occurred with their lending program back in January. It caused the token Rune to lose about 85% of its value. So it went from about $7.50 December. It's trading around $1.20 now. So what happened, and I won't get into too much details. Maybe we'll write a newsletter or an investment thesis about it.
I was gonna suggest that because it seems like you have a really good understanding of this. Maybe it's a token people would like to look into. And like, just to mention, Rune, not to confuse with like Bitcoin runes. Just be careful with that. This is the Thorchain. Okay. keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people know Bitcoin runes, and yeah, that can be confusing. So yeah, so rune is the token. The protocol is called Thorchain. It's a layer one. So just getting back into what happened, Thorchain has a lending application that allows people to lend assets into the protocol, and they generate interest or yield by lending their assets. So the mechanism is that people lend like Bitcoin or Ethereum, for example, and when they do that, Rune gets burned. So the Rune token gets burned. And then when the lenders close out their loans, new Rune gets minted that's able to repurchase the collateral to be returned to the lender. So what happens, there are times when, if the token underperforms the collateral, more Rune ends up getting minted that was burned, right? Which is inflationary. So I think it's important to note that this wasn't unknown. This was, a major debate amongst the Thorchain team when they were rolling out this lending program. So they put quite a bit of safeguards in place to mitigate the inflationary pressures. But, users on X and Discord started to gain traction talking about an existential risk to the protocol with inflation if the Rune token, doesn't perform well. And then, one of the founders made a pretty dumb, I would say, just freezing the ability to do any lending, which just exacerbated things. People started to freak out. People started closing out their loans. And, after that founder made the decision to freeze all lending, the node operators got together within 2 hours and, undid that because they realized there was a bad idea, which was the right move. But unfortunately, the damage had already been done. So the token sold off quite a bit. I think the long-term thesis is still intact. I do think the token will recover. So that's what, it's kind of a, buy when there's blood in the streets type of situation. That's one of the tokens that I'm interested in right now.
Nice. Okay, so Thorchain, bullish on it. Is there any other projects that you would like to talk about? Like, I don't know, any other altcoins? What do you think about acquiring altcoins right now?
I do. I'll actually touch on Ethereum quickly because it's another, I guess, contrarian investment idea that I'm starting to get incrementally more bullish on.
Okay.
It's really like, as you probably know, it's really one of the most unloved large cap tokens in the space right now.
Well, I saw it in 1800, like a couple of days ago.
Exactly. So I think I just read this morning that XRP's fully diluted value flipped Ethereum's today or yesterday or something like that. So and you actually wrote a very good newsletter explaining some of the problems that ETH is having, namely, at the proliferation of layer twos on top of ETH and the lack of, real meaningful value accrual.
Yeah. And let's reiterate that, guys. Like, we are writing a lot of newsletters. So that was one that I wrote like a couple of months ago. So really don't forget to go and follow us there because we write a lot of research. So don't forget to follow us. Okay, sorry. Let's continue.
So you did a really good job laying out the problems with ETH and kind of why it was underperforming. So, but the reason that I'm starting to get more bullish on ETH now is that the Ethereum Foundation really seems to be addressing a lot of the problems that you mentioned in your newsletter. For example, they're implementing faster block times, which will allow the layer one to actually compete more with the layer two, reduce gas fees, so on and so forth. We both recently attended Consensus Hong Kong, and we heard from a lot of Ethereum insiders. I think besides meme coins, which were going crazy at the time, the majority of the sessions that I listened to were about Ethereum. And the main takeaway that I got from listening to a lot of those sessions and listening to a lot of these people who really work with the Ethereum Foundation is that a lot of the builders and developers and the people who are on in using ETH every day are really bullish. They recognize that there's like a marketing and a communication problem but they also were very clear that the Ethereum Foundation is working really hard to kind of fix these problems. Like, remember, like, there's a lot of growth of developers on Solana, Sui, Aptos, for example, but the majority of developers are still on ETH. So there's still a ton of activity going on. There just needs to really be a realignment of incentives that can help kind of the ETH token regain some of the value that it's lost.
That's a really good point. I'm invested fully in Bitcoin and then Solana. It's your second Ethereum? Yeah, your Bitcoin and then Ethereum, or no?
My second largest position is Solana.
Okay.
Still, and then Ethereum's probably third or fourth. But I imagine that I'll be adding to my Ethereum position, especially with, prices down at 1,800.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think there's going to be a lot of volatility. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to add to tokens at lower prices even than they are now.
Sounds good. Listen, one of my favorite newsletters you have written was the one recently about the utility tokens and why retail, meaning us, might be overpaying for altcoins and like how things have changed. Yeah, I think it would be worth to maybe comment it of how do you see other utility tokens, and you're holding any? What are your visions? Really go back to the newsletter because that has been, I think, one of the most valuable analysis that Chico Web3 has made for us.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the compliment on the newsletter. So so that newsletter was really about fully diluted value, which is kind of a metric that people are starting to pay more attention to, because historically in the past, it really didn't matter. So for example, like when Ethereum did an ICO, they ICO'd like 90% or more of their total tokens. They were all, circulating in the market. So there was no really supply overhang that would generate selling pressure in the markets. So it's important when you say utility tokens, is important distinction, because meme coins, for the most part, or things that don't have utility, they just kind of release all the tokens at once to investors, no insiders or venture capital. But a lot of these new utility tokens, Sui, for example, Sui is a perfect example. I mean, I'm bullish on Sui and I own some, but what happens with a lot of these tokens is they have these big investments from venture capital, and venture capital gets allocated something like 80% of all the available tokens, and those are locked up for like 5 years or so. Eventually, though, all those tokens that go to the VC investors get unlocked and are ended up being sold into the market. So that creates significant selling pressure. One thing I think is important, and there's a lot more detail in the newsletter, but when evaluating a new token, it's really, you really have to understand the tokenomics. So for me, like if I'm looking at a token and I see like a low ratio of market cap to fully diluted value, for me, that's like an instant yellow flag. I really have to be bullish on the project, on the protocol, to make an investment there, because the activity and the growth of the protocol needs to be able to, outperform the selling pressure from venture capital kind of just dumping their tokens onto the market as soon as the unlocks come on. So the perfect example I always give is Sui. I do own Sui, but it's got a market cap of like $7.5 billion now and a fully diluted value of $23 billion. People look at that and say, oh, the market cap is $7.5 billion. There's a lot of space to grow here, not realizing that if all of those tokens were unlocked today, that market cap all of a sudden would be $23 billion. So that's the kind of the gist of that topic. Yeah.
Well, before closing and asking you about your future plans, I'm going to put you on the spot again. I want to pick your brain. Okay, so of course, being bullish on altcoins in this bull market, knowing that you said at the beginning you still believe there's going to be an altcoin season. I still believe it's going to be an altcoin season, even when my DM is full of people saying, and you still believe there's going to be an altcoin season after this? Anyways, yes, because capital rotation is going to happen when we reach the euphoria part. When you see the Bitcoin is going vertical and it's green every day and it's going up, 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 up. people are going to rotate their capital because that's how the human mind works. But anyways, we believe it's going to be an altcoin season. So question for you. It's easy to be bullish on altcoins in a bull market, but how much of your altcoin position are you planning on holding for the bear market, keeping it long term? And how much are you planning on just selling on what you believe will be the top of the cycle, or however you're organized to take profits from the cycle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I think that I'm a long-term hodler of Bitcoin only. I probably won't ever sell my Bitcoin, but altcoins are completely different. I have no interest in holding anything through a bear market. Corrections, yes, fine, but a prolonged bear market, I'd rather be in a stable coin.
Interesting. I disagree a bit, but this is not an interview today. No, I think I will hold a bit of my Solana long term, because I do think buying Solana now, it's like holding Ethereum in 2017, is what we've been saying, but I haven't seen Ethereum in the hundreds. Well, during the past bear market, I saw Ethereum in 500, and I bought a whole Ethereum by then, and I still hold it. But, in the hundreds, as we're seeing Solana right now, I don't know if we're going to see this price again. So I'm thinking of holding my Solana a bit longer. Right. Well, thank you so much for your expertise, Chico. I love that you're here right next to me. So it's been a really nice episode. Maybe we can just open the conversation a bit of like, what are your future plans and what is next in this crypto journey? Because you quit your Wall Street job to go full-time with me. And given that this interview is in English, do you plan to learn any Spanish and engage more with the Latin community that is starting to love you and take advantage of all the knowledge that you have to share?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, I am planning on learning Spanish, and I think, well, hopefully the next time we have a conversation on this podcast, it'll be in Spanish. That would be ideal. But yeah, I'm excited about kind of jumping 100% into Web3. As probably many of your listeners know, we created a new channel.
Just say it, because I think I haven't broadcast this.
Okay, so we have a new channel called Crypto Nomads, where we're going to be producing content. We're going to be traveling around the world, really, to a lot of crypto-friendly countries and jurisdictions. And we're going to be sharing a lot of stories and information that we learn along the way. Eventually looking forward to kind of creating an all-encompassing business, which is the long-term goal for us, where we can help people and businesses integrate crypto into their lives, into their portfolios, into their businesses, and educate, definitely.
Yeah, education, especially self-custody, securities, it's something we are dealing with nowadays. So we're learning a lot. Definitely being crypto nomads is going to be an awesome experience. And we're going to start in Costa Rica, amigos. We're going to Costa Rica. So whoever is in Costa Rica over the next 2 months or month and a half, let us know. We will be happy to connect. Our DMs are open. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Threads, Instagram. Again, follow our newsletter on Substack. You can find all the details in our Instagram account. So it's time to close this amazing episode. Thank you again, Chico Web3, for being here. And it's not going to be the last time we hear from you. Thank God.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's been really fun.
Thanks. Gracias por unirte a este podcast, episodio 18. Si lo disfrutaste, te invito a que lo compartas con algún escéptico, cripto o tradicionalista del sistema económico actual. No te pierdas nuestro próximo episodio, donde exploraremos más temas cripto con visión. Si te gusta mi vibra y nuestra vibra y de lo que hablamos, síguenos en Instagram en @chicaweb3.eth y en X, el antiguo Twitter, como @lachicaweb3. Ponte las pilas con cripto. Nos vemos en la próxima. Bye.